According to Tennessee Titans head coach Brian Callahan, Treylon Burks is just fighting to be active on game days, which means the hype train has to stop. I'll break it down on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am breaking down everything you need to know from day one of Tennessee Titans mandatory minicamp. First, Treylon Burks is simply fighting for a spot on the game day roster, so the hype train needs to slow down. Also, T'Vondre Sweat still not out on the field. I'll give you an update on what Brian Callahan had to say about the rookie's absence. Also, we got some big surprises on day one of mandatory minicamp, including Josh Whyle and John Ojukwu at right tackle. So much to talk about on today's show. Before I get into it, thank you for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast. Once again, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, 25 years as a Tennessee Titans fanatic. I've covered the team for the Locked On Podcast Network for 5 seasons, USA Today, Sports Illustrated, and I'm a certified film junkie breaking down the X's and O's with you guys all year long. But with all that being said, let's get it. Treylon Burks is in the spotlight again, and the hype has been building throughout the offseason. It's deja vu for all kinds of Titans fans, seeing it over and over and over again, the Treylon Burks hype. And of course, we got it this year. But some comments from Tennessee Titans head coach Brian Callahan, I think, really put the brakes on that hype train. And here's what Brian Callahan had to say about Treylon Burks, who worked on special teams on Tuesday, and worked at gunner on punt coverage team. Callahan said via TennesseeTitans.com, quote, absolutely, he is going to have to contribute on special teams. You only get so many hats on game day. If he's one of those guys on game day, we're going to have to find a place for him. Guys like him should be great special teams players on top of it, just because of his size and speed. The gunner thing is something I think he's capable of doing. There might be some more roles for him in other phases as well. But anytime you're not a full-time starter, you're going to have to contribute somewhere on game day. And I think Trey's attitude and approach to special teams has been fantastic. All right, Brian Callahan made that sound as good as possible. But let's just be honest about what this situation is right here. Be honest. Your former first-round pick going into year 3 is not only not a starter, but he's somebody who needs to produce on special teams and be someone they use on special teams just so he'll be active on game day. Like, stop the hype train. I'm seeing the Treylon Burks hype everywhere all the time. Oh, he can do it. He can bounce back. He's just fighting to make the game day roster. You can only carry like 46 to 48 players on the active game day roster on a Sunday for the NFL. I think it's 48 now. It used to be 46. But he's just fighting to be one of those guys. This is like the conversation we had with Kyle Phillips last year. If Kyle Phillips cannot punt return, then he has no value on the roster. Like, no coach is going to keep him there. You can't be a 4th, 5th string wide receiver and not do special teams. Now, I think Treylon Burks, and people kind of laughed at me when I suggested this when the rules changed earlier this offseason, but I think Treylon Burks, and you look at what Callahan said, there might be some more roles for him in the other phases as well. I think you're talking about kick returner, and I believe Brian Callahan said that that was something that they would consider as well. So if Treylon Burks can be part of the kick return team and this new design of kick return that we're going to see from the NFL this year, and also play gunner and coverage teams and stuff like that. But just think about it. Jamar Chase, another first-round receiver, who obviously is a far better player than Burks, but Jamar Chase is going into his 4th year. Imagine if his 3rd season, he was coverage team on punt. And hey, if he wants to be active on game days, he's going to have to cover punts. Justin Jefferson just got the biggest contract in NFL history. He was the 22nd pick, a first-round wide receiver. I mean, look at Garrett Wilson. Imagine if the Jets were saying that Garrett Wilson needed to play on special teams to be active. Like, not only does the hype train need to stop, this is an outright disaster in all reality. If you take the totality of the Treylon Burks experience, this is a disaster. All right? And, you know, you got Titans fans out there who just refuse to accept when things have gone bad, when things are just off the rails. And not only should the Treylon Burks hype completely stop here, don't be fooled again, but we need to talk about how big of a disaster it is and has been and probably will end up being, okay? So if Treylon Burks was lighting the world on fire and they thought that he would be pushing to get a ton of reps all the time and he would be that number one backup who's rotating in and out all the time and is going to be a big factor in the offense, if he's a big factor in the offense, he's going to be active on game days. Like, that wouldn't be a question that the coach is saying, hey, he better do better on special teams or he might not get one of the hats on game day. Like, slow the hype down, okay? I said it this all season. I said it last regular season during the middle of the season. I said it this all season. I will say it again. My everydayers have heard it a ton. Treylon Burks is a ghost. Any decisions, any moves, any thoughts that you make or have going forward at wide receiver do not need to include Treylon Burks. Like, when I said that the Titans should be looking at wide receiver early in the draft next year, people are like, well, you know, Hopkins is a free agent, but Burks is going to. No, stop it. Stop it. The head coach is literally saying he's fighting right now to find an active roster role on game days. So not only should the hype train stop, we need to throw it off the tracks and be done with it entirely. Like, it should just be, if he does anything, we should, it's a pleasant surprise. And get ready for him to not be on the team once his rookie contract is up. But anyways, do want to at least mention this. Treylon Burks did smoke Caleb Farley on a deep route, according to A to Z Sports. But it was a bad throw by Mason Rudolph, so it wasn't completed, which, you know, Burks has had his fair share of that situation as well. I'm just happy to see Caleb Farley out there. Brian Callahan included Caleb Farley in the special teams conversation as well, that Caleb Farley needs to be, you know, someone who contributes on special teams. But we were hearing that last year, and we already know that. And at this point, you know, no one has hope for Caleb Farley left. So it's a different situation than Burks entirely. But I do also want to throw in, while we're talking about Burks, wide receivers, according to Jim Wyatt from TennesseeTitans.com, Will Levis was sharp in practice. He went 6 for 10 on his throws and 7-on-7, but 2 of those were drops, one by NWI and one by Ridley. According to Wyatt as well, he had a strike across the middle of the field to DeAndre Hopkins, which, can we stop with that nonsense as well? I spent a whole segment on it, but Hopkins was back in the facility at day one of mandatory minicamp. So all the consternation about DeAndre Hopkins' situation was completely blown out of proportion. And he's back with the team and will be with the team. And we could all move on from that. But he wasn't the only person who returned to the field for the Titans at mandatory minicamp. But there were also a lot of people who still weren't out on the field, including T'Vondre Sweat. And Brian Callahan talked about how it's never ideal to have the kind of start that T'Vondre Sweat has had. So we're going to talk about that, plus some big surprises before we do that. Do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, it's NBA Finals time, folks. If you want to get tickets to go to the NBA Finals, there is no better place than Game Time. It's the fastest and the easiest way to do it. Also, you can get some killer last-minute deals closer to tip-off on Game Time because their prices actually go down as you get closer to tip-off. You also get all-in prices. You get a view from your seat. You get the Game Time guarantee, where if you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. They have the best features in the industry. Make sure you take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, breaking down day one of mandatory minicamp. It feels like training camp right now. Like, I'm so excited. I'm so hyped for all the news and all the content that we're getting. I'm going to be breaking down practice tomorrow as well. And then, of course, we have another practice on Thursday that I'm going to be breaking down for you guys. Whew, man, it sucks we're going to take this little break, but it sounds like the Tennessee Titans are going to go through with that final OTA segment next week. So we're going to get some good content there before the summer break, before training camp. But anyway, a lot to discuss. Perfect attendance for the Tennessee Titans, but that doesn't mean that everyone was out on the field. I'll break down who returned, who was absent. Before I do, thank you again for making Locked On Titans your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. Shout out to my everydayers out there as well, tuning in Monday through Friday. Couldn't do it without you guys. Thank you all so much. But perfect attendance, according to Brian Callahan. Everybody on the team was in the building, engaged in meetings, stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that everybody was out on the field. And according to ESPN's Teron Davenport, Jeffrey Simmons, Tavondre Sweat, Nicholas Petit-Ferrer, Jalen Duncan, TK McClendon, Shaheem Carter, Anthony Kendall, and Colton Dow were all missing from the field. Okay, and to add on to that, L'Jarius Sneed stretched on a side field, part of team stretch, and then he left with a trainer. And I'll get to the L'Jarius Sneed situation here in just a moment, but we got to start with Tavondre Sweat, man. Like, I know that some of you, no matter what I say, you're going to be mad that I'm talking about Sweat, and you're going to be mad that it's not positive, and that's perfectly fine, because to me, this reminds me of Treylon Burks. When Treylon Burks was struggling at the beginning of his career and he couldn't participate constantly in the OTAs and he had to leave his rookie minicamp with conditioning issues. And, I had somebody even tell me, the same thing happened with Burks. So why are we? That's a terrible example. You don't want to use Treylon Burks as an example of what's going on right now. That did not work out, as we just talked about. So I just want to say this. Take Tavondre Sweat's name out of it. Take Sweat's name out of this conversation. If I told you the day before the draft that the Titans' second-round pick was going to participate in one day of rookie minicamp, was going to miss all of team OTAs, miss mandatory minicamp as well, and would not have signed his contract by the second week of June, how would you have felt? I know what you would have said. You would have said, that sucks. That's kind of lame. Dang, really? I hope he gets it together. Okay? Like, no one is being honest about this because they're mad that I didn't like the Sweat pick. That's what's happening here, is no one refuses to admit anything, but I'm starting to see it from other people. Hey, when am I allowed to be disappointed by the Tavondre Sweat thing? When are we allowed to be a little concerned about this start? It's already. That's the point. There is no way that you can color this in any other way than disappointing. Doesn't mean that Tavondre Sweat is going to be a bust. Doesn't mean that Tavondre Sweat is not going to have a good rookie year. No. He could absolutely rebound from all of this, do well in training camp, be ready to go for the year. Absolutely. But you cannot ignore the fact that this is a terrible start. And I'm seeing tweets from the Colts OTAs where Adonai Mitchell has been an incredible standout. He's making these plays all over the field. He's been so incredible, blah, blah, blah. And that's the guy I wanted the Titans to take. Like, there's just no way that you can tell me. Here's the thing. A rookie missing all of OTAs, missing mandatory minicamp, that in itself, you can't lie, just without the name attached, that's disappointing for a fan to hear. You add in that T'Vondre Sweat's biggest issue as a player and his number one concern on his scouting report was his conditioning. So no matter what, now he's missing out on valuable conditioning. Not to mention missing out on scheme stuff, missing out on practice, missing out on chemistry out on the field with his teammates that rookies desperately need. Now he's also missing an opportunity to get in better shape and be conditioned, which is something that we all should be at least mildly concerned about anyway, because that's the only, true negative on his scouting report is you worry about the conditioning, the off-field, the weight, along with playing a little bit high, but that's technique. So if you're not at least a 1 out of 10 on concern on this, then you're just lying. You're lying. That's all that it comes down to, because if you took the name out of it and I told you this situation would happen a day before the draft, you would be like, dang, that's not ideal. And Brian Callahan admitted that himself. Brian Callahan said via TennesseeTitans.com, quote, "It's never ideal. You never want to miss any time if you can help it. There is an adjustment period that guys go through. You want them to be out there and present as much as possible. Again, there is not much you can do about it. And as long as guys are still on top of the mental side, the physical side work kind of comes along with it. There's plenty of time for that still, but still certainly not what you want. You don't want to miss time if you can help it." I mean, and Ramon Foster, who works inside the building for the Tennessee Titans, has done all of the media stuff with their media team throughout this offseason. Local host in Nashville, radio show, former NFL player, been on this show. I've interviewed Ramon Foster on this show. He's on the radio on Wednesday saying he thinks that T'Vondre Sweat's weight clauses in his contract is what is preventing him from being signed. I said that earlier this week. My everydayers will remember. So he doesn't want to sign the contract that has weight clauses. Why? Why are you so worried about that? Why not just be at your weight? He's missing a ton of practice time. His conditioning is the number one concern with his game and his scouting profile. Like, if you're not at least a touch disappointed by this, again, I think you're just lying to yourself. You just don't want to admit that there are concerns here because it's relentless optimism when you're a fan, right? That's just how things happen. But I don't fan that way. And I know a lot of you guys don't fan that way either. We can acknowledge a logical, disappointing thing here. All right. Now, with L'Jarius Sneed, I do want to say this, though, just to be fair. Brian Callahan said that it's still a short-term injury for T'Vondre Sweat and that he'll be ready and available for the start of training camp for sure. Said maybe he'll be out there next week, but it's still considered short-term. So, hey, maybe he's back next week, signs his contract, everything's quelled. We'll talk about it. I'll say, all right, nothing to worry about here, and we'll have that discussion. But for right now, I mean, I don't know how you can't be at least mildly concerned about the start, because it's not just the time missed and the schematics and the chemistry, but the conditioning. He's going to be behind now. There's no way around it. He's behind other rookies in the NFL, and that is not the start you wanted from a guy whose conditioning is a worry. With L'Jarius Sneed, Brian Callahan admitted the situation. Quote, "It's a management thing. They managed him in Kansas City. We'll manage him here. So he is working back from all the things he's got to work back from, but it will be a management thing throughout the course of training camp and the season." Look, they're going to manage L'Jarius Sneed the exact same way that Kansas City managed him. They're not going to ask him to go out there and play every single rep. They're not going to ask him to go out there and be out there every single day. L'Jarius Sneed is a proven veteran player who has proven it in the NFL on the field that he could dominate and he could take care of business with the management plan that he was on. Why change that? Why expect anything different? Why try to run him into the ground in the summertime? Like, it's just not worth it for a proven veteran who you know what you're getting from. Do exactly what they did in Kansas City. He was fantastic in Kansas City. Why would you go against any of that? Also want to mention here, Teron Davenport reported from ESPN that Harold Landry, Ryan Stonehouse were back out on the field, and no one reported this. The Titans released videos, but DeAndre Hopkins back out on the field. I told you guys that whole rumor, that whole conversation about Hopkins was absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And look who's back with the Titans for the first day of mandatory camp. So that was boredom talking with DeAndre Hopkins. We can move that past that now, hopefully. But back on the field, everybody calm down. With that being said, let's switch gears here. There are some guys who have been surprises for the Tennessee Titans so far. Josh Whyle at tight end, couple guys on the offensive line. I'm going to tell you what Coach Callahan had to say about some of those guys and talk about where they fit within the offense now. Before I do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. All right. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, whether it's big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking the same thing, and of course, it's the T'Vondre Sweat concern. I think people are just lying to themselves at this point if they don't have a touch of disappointment with the situation. But here's the reality. Therapy can be different for everyone, and most of us have much bigger problems than our favorite sports teams. And it's still important to get those things off your chest every once in a while, though. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible. It's suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Titans fans, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about Treylon Burks, the comments on him and his roster battle. We talked about T'Vondre Sweat not being on the field, but also some returns from Titans key players like Ryan Stonehouse and Harold Landry. And we have breaking news as well, which is great because we just finished the T'Vondre Sweat segment. Sweat has finally signed his contract. That's finally been signed. So you hope that the contract situation wasn't what was keeping him off the field. If he's on the field on, Wednesday, on Thursday, then that'll kind of tip us off that the contract is exactly what that was, because Brian Callahan, the comments we read earlier, make it sound like he wasn't going to be available this week no matter what. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. But Sweat has signed his contract. So there's at least that. The Titans and Sweat's team were able to iron out whatever language they were trying to figure out, which, of course, probably has to do with conditioning clauses, when the payouts happen, a bunch of different stuff. But there we go. There's that. But what we're going to do now is talk about some big surprises throughout the offseason and at minicamp, including Josh Whyle, the offensive line. Before I get into it, do want to let you guys know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. It's on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts from Locked On, plus all our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available in the free Fire TV channels app. But Josh Whyle, I talked about it on an episode earlier this week. I talked about it a little bit at the end of last week. My everydayers will remember. Shout out to you guys. But just contemplating the idea of Josh Whyle potentially being the Titans tight end one. His body type, his style of play fits the Callahan offense a little bit better than Chigakonkwo. He gives you a little bit more versatility because of his size, his ability to line up as an inline, wide tight end, as a blocker. Chigakonkwo is just never going to be that guy. He just doesn't have the build for it. It's just not his play style. So it could allow Josh Whyle to kind of take a step up. And Whyle got a rave review from starting quarterback Will Levis on Tuesday. Levis had this to say via TennesseeTitans.com, quote, "I love Josh. He's a juice guy that we got on this team, and he's come along as one of those guys just this year, which has been cool to see him come out of his shell and be a really cool and fun presence in the locker room. He works his tail off, and he's prepared every day. He puts a lot on himself. I feel like that's why we're pretty similar. Ever since we came in here as rookies, we've been hip to hip, being able to keep ourselves accountable. He's made huge strides, and you can just tell from the moment he got here for workouts that he really worked on himself and his body and how he's going to approach this year, and it's paid off for him a lot. And I look forward to continuing to see him develop." Levis loves Josh Whyle. They've come in together. They have a bond. They have a connection. If Whyle can continue to build out his body and play with strength and develop as a blocker, there's no reason that he can't be the tight end one for the Tennessee Titans. Now, it's going to be a committee. All right, this isn't a situation where it's just, oh, Josh Whyle is the tight end one. He's the starter 70% of snaps. They're going to rotate a lot, I think. But Josh Whyle could be that number one guy. He's got the more traditional build, the more traditional play style, and I think it would help Chikakonkwo as well to maybe not be thrust into that environment. And we talked about it earlier this week. Chikakonkwo said last week at OTAs that the new scheme fits his style better. Well, it's because he's a pass catcher. They're going to pass the ball more, and he's not great in run blocking, and they're not going to run as much. So it all kind of fits together. The other guy here is Saahdiq Charles, and we've been talking about Charles for quite a minute on the show as well. He's a bigger body guy, 320 pounds, 10, 15, 20 pounds heavier than the other right guard options. He's someone who Bill Callahan handpicked and wanted to sign. He's somebody who wanted to come be with Bill Callahan once again. He worked with him earlier in his career. And Saahdiq Charles got a rave review from Brian Callahan as well. Brian Callahan said this, quote, "You see his strength and power. Those things do show up. His athleticism, he's learning a lot of new techniques as well. So that has been fun to see him grow. You see him starting to take the next step as the days have gone by here. Been good to see from him. There's a lot to like about Saahdiq. He's got some experience playing as well. So you hope he is another guy who can ascend as he learns more and more." And I also want to mention that Paul Kuharsky talked to Saahdiq Charles after practice, and you can go to Paul's Twitter account and see the videos. But honestly, PK was kind of pressuring him into saying that he's the starting right guard and that he's been working at starting right guard. And I mean, Paul would only do that if he is seeing it and he doesn't want to admit it himself, because that would kind of break the media code for the Titans. You can't say who's starting, who's lining up where. The Titans don't allow that to happen. But PK was basically asking him to say that he's been the top guy at right guard so far. And he danced around it a little bit because he knows he's not supposed to admit that. You know, it's pretty obvious. But it's also pretty obvious from the questions and his reaction that Saahdiq Charles is starting at right guard right now. So very interesting. Got a rave review from the coach, handpicked by Bill Callahan. We've been talking about that possibility. I think we really need to start laying in that possibility that Saahdiq Charles could be the starting right guard for this team. Jack Gibbons, it's like, I'm forgetting the character's name, but the bar in The Simpsons, Mo is always throwing him out, and somehow he's still behind him. The meme that you guys have seen, that's Jack Gibbons. All right, Brian Callahan said, quote, "Gibbons has a lot of value. He's taken a leadership role. Quote, you don't have to be a high-end athlete to be a good off-ball linebacker." Jack Gibbons just knows football, man. And again, Mike Kelly says he may not be a high-end athlete, but Jack Gibbons knows what to do. He talked about how he's embraced the scheme. He knows the defense. Like, he's just a really smart physical guy. Jack Gibbons, can't get away from him. Might surprise some people. And then finally, John Ojukwu, the third-year player, was an undrafted free agent with the previous regime. Actually, it might be his second year. Now that I think about it. No, third. Anyways. Ojukwu, according to Terry McCormick, has been getting first-team reps at right tackle. And Brian Callahan said, quote, "He's doing everything that you'd want a player in that situation to do. He takes it very serious. He's outstanding in the meeting room. He's taken the scheme and he's learned it. I've been really surprised. He's a guy I didn't know much about, and as he has gotten more opportunities, he's started to show up. When you're a guy in that position, that is all you can ask for. He keeps stacking good days together. We will see when we get to training camp what that looks like, but he's done everything you can possibly do with the opportunity he has been given, and that is always good to see," end quote. John Ojukwu, an undrafted free agent from a few years ago, got some time at times last year, but was never a guy who was consistently on the roster, that was consistently relied on. And with NPF out, Jalen Duncan hit or miss, John Ojukwu has a real chance here to, I don't think he'll end up being the starter for the Titans at the end of the day. He would take a major leap, but I think he could secure a roster spot as a backup tackle here, and he could knock Jalen Duncan out. And it would be Latham, NPF, Ojukwu, and Leroy Watson. So Ojukwu could get up there to start battling with Leroy Watson as the swing tackle. That would be a major development. So other than that, McCreary had a good breakup. According to, I think it was A to Z Sports who reported that, or it was Jim Wyatt in his recap. Want to try to give credit where credit is due, of course, but yeah, Harold Landry back in explosive. So much happened on Tuesday. Hope I summarized all of it for you guys as best as possible. We got another practice tomorrow, and I'm going to be here breaking it down with you guys. But with that being said, that is going to do it for me today, folks. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.